Imagine a woman whose beauty was so powerful it made anyone who looked at her fall in love, but who, due to a divine curse, turned her face into a deadly weapon. Medusa, the Gorgon, is one of the most fascinating and tragic figures in Greek mythology, but her story is more than just a curse. It's a tale of revenge and a fight for survival. In this video, we'll explore Medusa's fate and the incredible quest of a hero destined to face her power. Stay with me until the end, because the truth behind her story is more complex than you think. In a distant time, when gods and mythical creatures ruled the earth and the sea, there existed extraordinary beings endowed with beauty or power, splendor or terror. Among them stood the Gorgons, three legendary sisters whose name still evokes both fear and fascination today. They were creatures of a dual nature, an ancient, otherworldly beauty, but also a destructive power capable of petrifying anyone who dared to look at them. The three Gorgon sisters were Athena, Uriel, and Medusa, daughters of two ancient sea deities, Perseus and Ceto. Belonging to the primordial lineage of marine gods, the Gorgons lived at the edges of the known world, in remote, wild, and inaccessible lands. Perseus, an ancient and terrifying sea titan, embodied the darkest depths of the oceans. Ceto, his consort, personified the monstrous creatures of the sea. From this union were born extraordinary and often fearsome beings, including the Gorgons themselves. Athena and Uriel were immortal, eternal like the gods from whom they descended. Their figures are shrouded in legend as implacable guardians, untamable creatures whose power seemed reserved only for those daring enough to defy divine will. Athena, whose name means the strong, symbolized the unstoppable force of nature. Uriel, the vast, represented the untamed infinity of the natural elements. The first two sisters, therefore, embodied the wildest and most monstrous aspects of nature, but the third sister was entirely different. Medusa, the youngest, was the only mortal one. Her figure embodies fragility and extraordinariness combined, the human who clashes with the divine. Medusa lacked the immortality that protected her sisters, and lived in a suspended dimension between the human and the monstrous. Unlike her sisters, who were born as monstrous creatures with fangs, golden wings, and serpentine hair, Medusa was born with human features. She was extraordinarily beautiful, so much so that in the oldest versions of the myth, Medusa was described as a maiden with long black hair, thick and radiant like the night, or like cascades of black silk flowing over her shoulders. Medusa possessed a beauty so divine it seemed almost otherworldly. Her features were delicate yet intense, with deep and magnetic eyes, a harmonious face, and skin luminous as the dawn. Her beauty drew the attention of all, men, heroes, and even gods, making her an object of admiration and desire. Despite her fame, Medusa was neither arrogant nor vain. In fact, in the oldest versions of the myth, it is said that she was a humble and devout young woman. She served as a priestess in the temple of Athena, goddess of wisdom and military strategy, to whom Medusa had dedicated her life. Like all the goddesses' priestesses, she had taken a vow of chastity, renouncing love and earthly pleasures. Her only desire was to serve the goddess faithfully, safeguarding the temple and performing the sacred rites. Medusa spent her days within the temple walls, immersed in the tranquility and the soft light filtering through the marble columns. But this peace was not destined to last. The fame of the young priestess grew, and her name reached the ears of everyone, even the gods of Olympus. Among all those who desired her, Poseidon, god of the sea, stood out, a powerful deity, but also fierce and fickle, like the waves he ruled, accustomed to taking what he wanted without regard for the consequences. Her beauty had struck him like a lightning bolt in the heart of a storm. He wanted her, desired her at any cost. It did not matter that Medusa was consecrated to Athena, that her body and her heart belonged solely to the goddess. Poseidon, driven by burning desire, decided that this mortal woman would be his. And so it was that one night, while the moon faintly illuminated the sky and Athena's temple rested in sacred silence, Poseidon appeared. Legend tells that the god emerged from the depths of the sea, bringing with him the briny scent of the waves and the brutal force of storms. The temple, until that moment untouched, was enveloped by a dark presence, like a shadow creeping into the folds of the night. Medusa was alone, absorbed in prayer beneath the great statue of Athena. Perhaps she noticed the presence too late, or perhaps the sea god acted with the swiftness of a wave that overwhelms everything in its path, leaving no escape. Poseidon reached her and, indifferent to the holiness of the place, desecrated the temple and forever altered her life. This brutal act not only destroyed the girl's purity, but also desecrated Athena's sacred temple. Yet the blame did not fall upon the god, as often happened in Greek mythology, where divine power was rarely questioned. It was Medusa, innocent and a victim, who paid the highest price. When Athena discovered what had happened, her fury was relentless. The goddess saw the profanation of her temple as an unbearable offense, and despite embodying wisdom and justice, she directed her wrath not against Poseidon, but against Medusa. It is said that Athena appeared before Medusa as a cold and terrible shadow, her eyes blazing with indignation. The goddess spoke words that rang like thunder, words that would forever change the fate of the young priestess. "You have brought shame to this sacred temple," Athena is said to have declared. "From this day forward, no one will dare look upon you without knowing terror." And so Medusa suffered the cruelest of transformations. Her beautiful hair, once a symbol of her beauty, turned into living snakes, writhing and hissing around her face. Her skin grew pale as marble, her features hardened into an expression of eternal suffering. But the most terrible curse was her gaze. Anyone who met her eyes would be instantly turned to stone. Medusa, once a symbol of grace and charm, became a monster, a living nightmare, condemned to wander far from the world of men. Athena exiled her to a desolate land at the edge of the world, where no one could reach her without risking their life. From that moment on, Medusa lived alone, far from everyone, a prisoner of her new form. Every living being that approached her, driven by curiosity or madness, was instantly turned to stone. Legend tells that mountains of stone statues began to accumulate near her dwelling, silent witnesses to her curse. Medusa, however, was blameless. She had been the victim of a capricious god and punished by an inflexible and envious goddess. Her beauty, once a source of joy and admiration, had become a weapon of destruction, isolating her from the world and condemning her to a life of loneliness and despair. Ancient sources tell that Medusa took refuge in a barren, rocky region, shrouded in an eerie silence, where the winds blew like the laments of lost souls. It was a lightless place, where the sun seemed reluctant to shine, and even animals dared not approach. The first years of Medusa's exile were marked by terror. Reckless or desperate people, heroes seeking glory, and unsuspecting wanderers, all who dared approach her rocky dwelling fell victim to her curse. Wherever Medusa cast her gaze, life turned to stone. Vegetation withered, animals fled, and the valley that housed her became a stone graveyard, scattered with still, spectral statues. Each new petrified figure was an added burden to her, another wound inflicted upon her already lost humanity. Her voice, once sweet and melodious, was lost in the whispers of the wind, and the only sounds that accompanied her were the hissing of the serpents and the crunching of crumbling rocks beneath her feet. Over the years, Medusa began to accept her isolation as a new form of existence. Perhaps, she thought, it was better this way. Better to live far from a world that had abandoned and condemned her without appeal. Each day, as she looked out over the petrified desert surrounding her, she wondered if it would ever end. But even death seemed to reject her, as though even Hades, the god of the underworld, feared welcoming such a cursed creature. As time passed, stories of Medusa spread throughout the Greek world, carried by the wind in the mouths of the few survivors, those who had the wisdom to turn back before venturing too close to her dwelling. The Gorgon, as she was called, became synonymous with terror. The tales painted her as a monstrous creature, a demonic being with snakes for hair, and a gaze capable of turning anything to stone. But these stories distorted the truth. No one spoke of Medusa anymore as the beautiful maiden she had once been. No one remembered her innocence, her past as a devoted priestess. All that remained was the myth of the monster, a symbol of danger and death. Poets sang of her cruelty, and mothers frightened their children by whispering her name as night fell. In the centuries that followed, Medusa was no longer just a legend of fear, but also a powerful symbol. warriors began to carve her face onto their shields and armor, believing that the image of the Gorgon could strike terror into their enemies and protect them in battle. But Medusa knew nothing of these details. Far from everything and everyone, the world had forgotten her, and yet her fate was not yet complete. For even in the remotest lands, her name continued to echo, attracting the attention of heroes seeking glory and gods seeking vengeance. Soon, a young warrior named Perseus would embark on a journey to find the Gorgon and put an end to her suffering. The story of Perseus begins on the distant island of Seriphos, where the young man lived with his mother, Danae. She, a woman of rare beauty, was the subject of unwanted attention from Polydectes, the king of Seriphos. Polydectes desired to marry Danae, but her son Perseus opposed him fiercely, protecting his mother with all his strength. Irritated by the young man's presence, the king devised a plan as subtle as it was cruel to rid himself of Perseus. One day, Polydectes summoned a great banquet and announced that he intended to marry another woman, cleverly diverting attention from his true intentions. He asked his guests to bring him extraordinary gifts as tribute for the wedding. Perseus, young and proud, rashly declared that he could bring a gift far more precious than any other, the head of the Gorgon Medusa. Polydectes seized the opportunity. "So be it," the king replied with a mocking smile. "Bring me Medusa's head, and you will prove your worth to everyone." That challenge was not merely difficult, it was impossible. No one could approach the Gorgon and survive. The warriors knew it, the heroes knew it, and Perseus knew it too. Yet the young man, driven by his pride and his desire to protect his mother, accepted the mission. Perseus, however, was not alone. Even in this tale of tragedy and destiny, the gods watched closely, and some chose to offer him their help. Among them, the first to intervene was the goddess Athena. Though she was the one who had cast the curse upon Medusa, Athena had her reasons for wanting the Gorgon's head. It is said that Medusa's face, a symbol of pure terror, would serve as the perfect weapon to adorn the Aegis, the goddess's invincible shield. Athena appeared before Perseus and offered him the vital guidance he needed to face his mission. "You cannot confront Medusa as an ordinary mortal," the goddess said. "You will need the proper tools." Thus, with the help of Athena and other benevolent gods, Perseus received divine gifts that would make the impossible feat achievable. The shining shield of Athena, a polished bronze shield that acted as a mirror, allowing Perseus to observe Medusa without looking directly into her eyes. The helm of Hades, a magical helmet that rendered its wearer invisible. The winged sandals of Hermes. These would enable Perseus to fly swiftly and evade danger. The magical satchel, offered by the nymphs, where Perseus could safely store Medusa's head without risking being turned to stone. A sharp sword, forged by the god Hephaestus, capable of cutting through even the hardened skin of the Gorgons. With these gifts, Perseus was no longer just a mortal, but a hero blessed by the gods, prepared to accomplish an extraordinary feat. To reach Medusa's dwelling, Perseus had to embark on a long and perilous journey. The path to the Gorgon's refuge was fraught with dangers and cloaked in darkness. No one knew exactly where this forsaken land lay, but Athena guided him, whispering the way. It is said that Perseus had to cross desolate lands and spectral landscapes where time itself seemed to have stopped. With every step, he drew closer to that forbidden place, and each new rock or petrified figure he encountered reminded him of the peril that awaited him. At last, Perseus arrived at the dwelling of the Gorgons, where he was met with an unsettling sight. The three sisters, Stheno, Uriel, and Medusa, rested in a dark cavern, immersed in a deathly silence. Stheno and Uriel, immortal and invincible, unknowingly watched over Medusa, the only one of the three who could be slain. The Gorgon's cave was steeped in a suspended stillness, as though time itself had ceased to flow. Shadows stretched across the stone walls, distorting shapes and heightening the otherworldly atmosphere. Medusa lay at the center of the cave, her form barely visible in the faint light filtering through small openings in the rock. Her serpent hair lay still, as though even they were wrapped in an uneasy slumber. The Gorgon's face, despite its monstrous reputation, retained traces of the woman she had once been, a beauty twisted by the curse and marked by the pain of a solitary and feared existence. The cave was littered with stone statues. warriors, animals, and adventurers, petrified forever, silent warnings of Medusa's power. The young hero held his breath as he drew closer to the sleeping Gorgon. Perseus approached with extreme caution, using Hades' helmet to render himself invisible and observing everything through the reflection in Athena's shield. In his left hand, he gripped Athena's shield, polished and perfect, in which he watched the scene reflected. He could not look directly at Medusa. A single glance into her eyes would have been fatal. The young hero advanced slowly, calculating each movement with the precision of a hunter. Every step he took produced only the faintest sound, a soft rustling that blended with the subtle hissing of the serpents adorning Medusa's head. The snakes were like vigilant guardians, ready to awaken at the slightest sign of danger. Perseus stopped just a few steps away from Medusa. His heart pounded violently in his chest and sweat beaded on his forehead. Through the reflection in the shield, he saw the sleeping Gorgon, an image both terrifying and melancholic. That face, once celebrated as the symbol of beauty, was now a mask of loneliness and tragedy. The young hero gripped the sword forged by Hephaestus more tightly, the cold metal seeming to pulse in his hands. Athena had warned him there would be no second chance. He had to act quickly, with precision and without hesitation. With a final breath, Perseus raised the sword above his head, aiming for the Gorgon's neck. The blade gleamed for an instant in the dim light, reflecting the cavern's cold glow, and then it descended in a swift, decisive motion. The cut was clean. Medusa had no time to open her eyes or utter a sound. Medusa's fate was sealed, and the cave was marked by the consequences of that fateful moment. The snakes, deprived of their mistress, writhed in a final spasm of life before falling still and lifeless. But from Medusa's death, something extraordinary was born. Myth tells that from the Gorgon's blood, as it spilled onto the stone and mixed with the sea foam, two wondrous beings emerged. Pegasus, the winged horse symbolizing freedom and purity, and Chrysaor, the golden warrior. Pegasus, with his majestic snow-white wings, took flight the moment he appeared, stirring up a whirlwind of wind and dust. Chrysaor, on the other hand, emerged in silence, armed and powerful, as though destiny had already prepared him for future feats. Medusa, though defeated, left behind an immortal legacy that would forever mark mythology. The sound of the strike and the birth of Pegasus and Chrysaor awoke Medusa's sisters, Stheno and Uriel, immortal and ferocious. The two Gorgons rose with a terrible scream, a lament of pain and fury that made the cavern walls tremble. Their eyes searched for their sister's killer, but Perseus, still wearing Hades' helmet, was invisible to their enraged gazes. Despite his invisibility, the young hero could not afford to stop. With Medusa's head safely stored in the magical bag, Perseus rushed toward the cave's exit, aided by Hermes' winged sandals. Flying as swiftly as the wind, he managed to escape the Gorgons, who prowled the rocks screaming, unable to find the perpetrator of their loss. Medusa was dead, but her power lived on. Even after her decapitation, the Gorgon's head retained its petrifying gaze. Perseus kept it carefully, fully aware of the danger it still posed, but also of its immense value. Medusa's end marked the conclusion of a life filled with pain and solitude, a life twisted by the gods into a monstrous existence, unjustly punished for crimes she had not committed. Yet, through Pegasus and Chrysaor, Medusa had left the world something eternal, something that transcended her death. Now, Perseus' destiny would lead him toward new adventures. The head of Medusa would remain a symbol of terror, power, and tragedy. Her story, passed down through the centuries, would live on, reminding the world of the fragility of beauty and the unyielding nature of fate. Thank you for watching Medusa's incredible and tragic story. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Can you think of a more unjust story than Medusa's? Do you think it's a contradiction that a goddess known for wisdom, like Athena, would punish the victim rather than the perpetrator? Was Athena too afraid to challenge Poseidon, or does this reflect the deeply rooted victim-blaming culture of ancient Greece, even among the gods? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.